Welcome to Disability Empowerment Now. I'm your host, Keith Murphy DiConcini. Today I'm talking to Rebekah Greer Melocik, who is the book writer and lyricist for the Broadway musical How to Dance in Ohio. Rebekah, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Keith. Happy to be here.
So, I saw the musical 6 times, which I normally don't do. I normally cap it at 2 or 3.
Thank
But
you.
the music and the lyrics were so prominent and so utterly infectious that I kept going back and back. I have this fantasy in my head, and at any other point you would be concerned. But by saying that live on air, but in my head, and this is how creative I am, the Cats had just finished the movie. You and Jacob have just put the finishing touches on part 2, and all in the early brainstorming of part 3. Yeah, I just want to keep you all gainfully employed.
Thank you.
I had. And plus, I really want to see that happen. That's how creative I am. So that's the fantasy. We met at the Broadway reunion concert, which was wonderful and a very interesting concept for a Broadway musical that just closed to come back that way. I have been blessed enough to talk to Jacob, your wonderful collaborator. Last season, he was the final episode. I got to talk to some of the cast members as well. I've literally gone over this musical like 6 or 7 times in interviews. I can probably quote your words back to you. And I meant to have you send me a copy of the script so we can literally go line by line through the whole thing, because I have I refer to you as the female version of Shakespeare with what written, and because in all seriousness, you have wrote something that is, like in my mind, the musical equivalent of Hamlet. And that's not an easy feat at all.
Except not everyone dies at the end of
Yeah, yeah, I mean, taking out the drugs and sex, but Jacob put back in the rock and roll. This, I just gave a master class of how to smooth the creative team so they put you in the next 10 shows, guaranteed. This is how you do it, people.
Flattery gets you everywhere.
Thank you. But I really do mean that. Everything. It is and was an incredible show to experience that many times. How did you, first of all, how did you meet your collaborator, Jacob? And how did you first hear about the documentary, and what was the motivation behind the, oh yeah, this could be a hit musical? Because I'm thinking in the back of my head, you see books or movies get transferred to Broadway. You don't see a lot of documentaries make that jump. So what was it about this one in particular that really grabbed you?
Um, you know, well, the first question, where did I meet Jacob, my collaborator? Jacob and I met 14 years ago, at NYU's Graduate Musical Theater Writing Program. We got our MFAs at NYU, and we were both writing music and lyrics before we went into the program. And I went in there in part because I wanted to learn more about book writing. And though I am a musician and I love composition, I was less interested in the writing an entire musical score. And Jacob similarly is a fantastic lyricist, but wanted to focus on the music part. And so I think one of the reasons we work so well together is we have a lot of respect and understanding for what the other person does. Jacob is actually the one who found the documentary How to Dance in Ohio. And it was truly just him looking for something to watch one night. And it was very accidental.
I can totally imagine that.
Just going through, and it was the title.
Because
Uh,
we all do it.
yes, yes.
Always, like, there are too many choices. How do we nail it down? And
So
yeah, it was the title. I can totally picture that title in particular grabbing
yeah.
someone.
Well, it's very active and it's got a little poetry and of course, we work in musicals, it's got dance. And Jacob and I both grew up in Ohio. And so he thought, oh, Ohio, what's this? and, and then when he read the synopsis that it was about a group of autistic young adults in a social skills therapy group preparing for a dance, Jacob was like, oh, I have to watch this because his little sister Maria had just gotten her autism diagnosis. And, I'd known Maria since she was 13. And so I had seen a little bit of this journey of testing and, like IEPs and, and figuring out like what's going on. And it was interesting because when Maria got her diagnosis, there was this sense of relief. I don't want to speak for her, but what Jacob and I sort of took away from it was like, oh, here we go. Like
Yeah,
I'm not alone. I know what's going on now.
totally makes sense. There's a lot of clarity. Yeah, I mean, that's totally fair.
Yeah. And so then Jacob watched it and he sent me this impassioned email because the story really sang to him. And I think what he loved was that here
You
was,
still have that email.
oh yeah, oh definitely, definitely.
Be wonderful to, wow, because as you well know, Jacob is a very passionate person. Like, that is one of the things that really gravitated me to him. So before we go on, how I met him is TDF is a wonderful organization. And when I was in New York at the beginning of the year, I saw that musical several times because you guys hadn't put the soundtrack yet, and there was a fear in the back of my head, maybe they will release it. So I kept going. And the second time I went, I wasn't in the accessibility program yet. So what TDF does is send the tickets over, and that day the box office randomizes the seats. And just so happened to put me in a row in front of a few friends of Jacob, and he was saying hello, and I couldn't help but overhear. And so I let him finish saying goodbye. His partner was in the front row, I think, front row. And so as he was walking to his seat, and I normally don't do this, I grabbed his arm and tapped it and said, Excuse me, did I just hear you're the composer of this musical? It's fantastic. I gave him literally all my business cards and said I would really love to interview some of the cast members and anyone involved with this show. So it was because of TDF and the box office that randomly put me in the right place at the right time to meet Jacob.
Keith, can I just say, I think the entire trajectory of this musical has been right place at the right time.
Yeah.
From like Jacob finding that documentary in that moment, in that year, like in that moment of his life. We had been in conversations with our young producer friends, Ben Holtzman and Sammy Lopez, about doing a show. And, we're getting together every few months and just sharing ideas. And when we told them about this, it just so happened that Ben Holtzman was working for Hal Prince. It just so happened that Hal Prince wanted his next musical to be about autistic people. Like it was this, everything came together in a way that things don't for musicals. I was just saying this for like a couple of weeks. But yeah, like so much luck is required. And I feel like in some cosmic way, just the doors, not that there wasn't a lot of work and disappointment and heartbreak, but when I look back at the journey, it was much faster and smoother and sweeter than it usually is.
Well, you struck gold with this musical, the creative team, the accessibility team, and most of all, the cast.
Yes.
That you were able to get. And you didn't need a big name, although with the Syracuse, you had the original Angel from Rent.
Yeah,
And
well,
so, yeah, I've met him we did a meet and greet a few years ago. And so, but talk about what it was like writing songs for each character and having the other characters be in those songs, because you don't always see that in musicals.
Yeah, we had a big challenge in this ensemble show. Ensemble shows are tricky anyway.
Yeah.
Uh, but we had our seven autistic characters, who I would say, it was primarily their story, and then seven other characters around them, sort of part of that orbit. And I really try it in every show I write. I just want every part to be fun on stage. I hung up my acting hat a long, long, long time ago, but when I was performing, I loved it when I was a lead, and I also loved it when I was just in the chorus, being a townsperson. Um, and gosh, I think that in creating the ensemble, what was trickiest was, we say at the top of the show, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And even within these seven autistic people, we're only showing seven autistic experiences. And there's a lot that we didn't show in this version. Nicole D'Angelo, who was my script consultant on the show, and we just sort of picture Nicole and me sitting next to each other in all of the rehearsals, whispering back and forth. We've talked a lot about the fact that there were no non-speaking characters in the show, and we really, really hope that in future productions that there's a way to incorporate non-speaking autistic actors as well. So in creating these individual characters, I would say they're one part from the documentary. Like the first draft, I really just tried to use as much dialogue from the documentary as possible. But then we did our first industry reading in October of 2021. And that's when we cast our seven autistic actors that we had all the way through Broadway. And I'm sure that they say this too, like one part documentary, one part who they actually are, and then one part mixing in between, me tossing my own things in.
I'm so glad I didn't watch the documentary before I saw the musical, because it was after the closing on Broadway and right before I interviewed Jacob, and I was blown away by there's one big revelation or action in the musical that isn't in the documentary. But other than that, you just mentioned the music. It's just like it's not a complete carbon copy, but it's enough to where I would like, oh, that, okay, that, yeah, that, and that. And I mean, so a ensemble show is always hard, and I know nothing about writing musicals. That's never been my creative forte. But you needed to center or anchor around as Mel says in the show, a healthy, normal couple.
Yeah.
And so, how did you choose that specific couple while also structuring the musical to where we all knew they were the focus, but it didn't detract from any of the characters? I mean, every time I saw it, I knew what would happen once I saw it the second time, but I never felt like the main romance overpowered the other, which is a very delicate balancing act to do, I can imagine. And so, how did you do that, and why this couple?
It's so interesting the way that choices get made over the course of creating a piece of art over the course of 6 years. And I think about this a lot. A lot of this spring for me has been
Wait, you
about.
said 6 years?
Yeah. Yeah. The show was
Well,
written over
it
the course of
makes
6 years.
sense that I saw it 6 times. One for every year. Thank
Well,
you.
and I personally am a very iterative writer. Like early table reads are the worst for me because I get like a sketch of the characters down um and then build them. And then I love working with actors because it's so much more fun for me to get to write to their strengths. So once we cast, I mean, our whole cast, we got so lucky. We had so many comedians in the cast, but once we cast Ashley Wool and Connor Tagg and Amelia Faye, all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay, I see how each of these actors have a very specific sense of humor. So even as Amelia and I were growing closer, I remember after one workshop, we had this conversation about like both of us kind of have a sort of a macabre sense of humor, and we're very sweet, but we love spooky things. And we were talking, and it's like, we should make Caroline a little bit more into murder, like, just add a little bit. And so that's where the guillotine line comes from. It was really just Amelia and I palling around and trying to put our own senses of humor in there. And similarly, it was very fun to write jokes for Ashley Wool. And then even Imani, who has this incredible deadpan, and Mel, their
Yes,
character,
she does.
like Imani is a comedian in their own right, but a very different kind of comedy from
Yeah.
Connor Tate. So again, what a joy for me to get to write these parts tailored to the actors for 3 years. Uh, oh my gosh, and of course I lost my train of thought in loving on these actors so hard. I think what I was answering was the ensemble question, the romance.
Yeah.
So I don't consider romance is not my genre. I don't consider myself a very romantic person, happily in love for many years. But so, we talk about the choices that lead up to that. When Hal was directing the show, he he knew how he wanted it to end with Meredith and Drew in spotlight, spinning around. He had this very clear image in his mind, and we stuck with that throughout the entire
Okay. So, yeah,
thing.
I mean, and unfortunately, he passed away several months, but it's really good and sort of a tribute to him that you kept that idea intact. Like in literally all of the other interviews I've done, uh, I keep making analogies to the prom, which is another great musical, and they both end with a dance. And it's a slow burn through both of those musicals, and so you get the payoff at the end. And really, I wish Jacob would share to toot his own home. The music of How to Dance in Ohio is very much, at least in my mind, very similar to the prom. It's it's bombastic without being overwhelming. It's jazzy. It's romantic. It's everything I saw and heard in the prom in a very different context. So, Yeah, that, and I love how the last lines of the musical How to Dance in Ohio, it's literally Drew just saying 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, the only difference from the endings is in one musical, the characters kiss. And in the other one, the characters don't. It would, it wouldn't really work for those characters. And I mean, they are just at the beginning of,
Yes.
and so, yeah, I mean, but how did you do the balancing act of, because that's very difficult.
Yeah. Again, some of it, I really wanted to make sure that every character had some kind of arc. Even the smaller characters, even the parents. Like you want everyone to feel like they're a part of this community.
Yeah,
And so I mentioned that I'm a very iterative writer, and I do think a lot of it was just um, sculpting the book. When we would get into workshops, it would suddenly become apparent of like, oh, we haven't seen Meredith's dad in 45 minutes. Where's Michael? And so we would find, okay, well, how can we get a moment with even in the beginning of Act Two, Meredith sings that song Drift. And I asked our
which
director,
I love, by the way, because
thank
at
you.
the end of Act 1, you have no idea if she likes him the same way or is indifferent or it's creeped out, and then Drift comes and you're like, yes, yes, yes.
Drift is one of my
Maybe
favorite
it's
songs.
the hopeless romantic in me, but I was in my head jumping up and down for the characters because and Drift is such a great song in and of itself. Uh, but and so I should let you answer that. But
Keith, I'm so happy you said that about Drift because it was really funny. The workshop that we did before we went out of town for Syracuse, Drift didn't exist. And I somebody in the room or me, I would think all of us were like, does she like him? Yeah, well, it wasn't totally clear.
oh, see, I told the real Dr. Amigo who I I I just fawn over his
I
personality.
love him.
That's
Amelia's the
so
best.
it makes me bring my triple A game. I mean, when we met, I was in the blue crutch velvet jacket, and that was because of him. Because the closing of Broadway, I was talking to him and telling him about that very jacket. And I said, if I ever see you again, I will be wearing that jacket. But I mean, I told the real Dr. Amigo that the scene in the documentary that I really resonated with. And will I share what Dr. Amigo was feeling in that scene. It's where Dr. Amigo takes the real Meredith and the real Drew, these are very real people,
Yeah.
into the other room, and Drew would like to take you to the prom. Now, her eyes and her
Sure.
response was like, And my previous partner was autistic, and so I had seen that very excitement. And but it was Dr. Amigos like, okay then. Uh and I said, you would have think by her reaction that Drew had just proposed,
Yes.
because she was so flipping excited. I mean, it was almost like she was acting, but she wasn't. She
No,
really was that excited.
I'm so happy you brought up that moment, Keith, because that, like the particular timbre in Meredith's voice, the way that she says, sure, it's in my head all the time. And when we talk about like funny ways that characters get built, so because I love the way that she said, sure, there were many moments in the script where Meredith, the character, said, sure, because I grabbed onto that from the documentary.
Yeah,
But then I think, gosh, in our February 2023 workshop, so like the last thing we did before Broadway, uh, Nicole D'Angelo turns to me at some point. It was about the ending of the show when Drew says to Meredith, "Can we dance now?" And because of that moment in the documentary, I had Meredith going, "Sure," because I loved it. But then Nicole points out that our Meredith that we
yeah,
created is a yes or no person. And it was
yeah,
so great to have, again, one part from the documentary, one part from actual Madison, who originated the role. And so then we changed the end. Can we dance now? Yes. And that got a huge laugh in the show every time because it had the same enthusiasm. But then I went back and I changed every single Meredith answer to yes or no. And it became a defining quality of
yeah,
that character.
exactly. And so, talk about literally striking gold and getting the amazing cats, particularly the seven magnificent autistic actors, many of whom are singers and songwriters
Yeah.
themselves,
Yes.
and building that community, because at the end of the play, they very much seem like they're all family.
Yeah.
And in meeting them after the Broadway reunion, they act like it off stage as well. And you don't really get that a lot in Cats. And so, what would you like finding the seven autistic actors?
Um, what you said made me get very emotional because people talk about theater family show families, but this was like an extra like deep intimate relationship. Like I do think that one of like what people saw on stage, that sense of community existed off stage as well for all of us. And part of that was because we got to work together for so many years so closely. Um, some of it's luck. I always say, I always say that like this business is equal parts talent, tenacity, and timing. So I think, the fact that we did, we asked for self-tapes in 2021, and we were lucky that that all of those actors just happened to submit that they heard about it, that they were willing to put themselves out there because it seems, gosh, I feel like we've come so far in the industry,
Yeah,
even just in the last couple of years, but it was a risk for some of those actors who weren't necessarily open about
yeah,
being autistic. And to worry about, is there going to be a stigma if I'm open about this? Um, so I really appreciate that. But again, there was even a little bit of odd luck in the fact that Nicole D'Angelo, who I bring up all the time because I work so closely with them, Nicole missed their callback. Nicole is a really talented actor and wanted to be in the show. And I feel really, really lucky, just selfishly, that Nicole missed their callback, because then they ended up coming onto the music team and the script team and the access team. And I don't know what I would have done without Nicole on our side of the table. So again, a lot of that is just luck. And I say luck because, the 7 actors who originated these parts are incredible. And then the 5 covers that came on to be understudies for these roles were incredible. And, I remember when the show announced closing, someone posted on Instagram a comment about, oh, I'm so bummed. I really wanted to come see this show. I'm autistic and I'm in the arts. And my first thought was like, I'm really bummed you can't see this show too, because this cast is incredible and this production's incredible.
Yeah.
And yet the good news is, like, you'll get to do the show, so like, well, it'll be available for licensing eventually. And then like, that's what I'm most excited about, is that there are so many talented autistic actors that I hope will get to inhabit these roles. And again, one of the reasons that we wanted to have 7 autistic people in this show and not 1 or 3 or 5 was to just, again, really, really show the many personalities, that you can have this many autistic people in this one group, and we're still just showing like a tiny, tiny sampling of the spectrum.
Pardon me, had to close the door for a sec. So the scene that interests me, or that I want to know more about, and or go into pitching an idea for a sequel seamlessly, which, if I was Bruce Wayne, I would be writing you a check right now.
Can I jump in for a second, Keith? Because I also think these characters are so fantastic, and like, I want like a TV show, serialize it. I want, the movie version, but I also I think a huge part of launching this project is like autistic artists taking this story as their own.
Yeah.
So like, I hope this TV show happens, and I hope I'm not the writer,
Well,
but please just, everyone franchise it. It's
so the scene, I need some little scene.
Yeah.
It's where Mel and Ashley meet all the birds for a time. And you put in this line about they used to come over to Mel's house and play video games. And that I wanted to know more about, and you sort of get a payoff in Act 2 with Reincarnation. Wonderful song, by the way. There are no bad songs in this musical. That's another thing I'm stunned by. But that just building on that example and clear presence and voices in the autistic community, which was brought up by cast members, several cast members in the Broadway reunion show. I'll go one step further,
Yeah.
though. Make actually a late identifying autistic. You
Uh,
have so many avenues, or whoever writes the next one has so many avenues, and you don't have to do that because these are based on real people, and the real actually isn't autistic, or she doesn't uh, say that and in the documentary, but that would be that's one avenue that someone could drive down uh the sequel with, but you could just do it by exploring the relationship with Mel and Ashley, and then Remy eventually they find romance, and
yes.
that's a suggestion from one of the actors exploring what Drew and Meredith go through, if it's just a one shot done, or it's not hope, it's a real romance, because I mean you go through the entire first part one. I'm gonna keep referring to it, seeing those characters, and it's like, and you keep mentioning Nicole D'Angelo, and she's actually the first person I interviewed
Oh.
for this, and so part two of this interview is gonna be getting you and her together, and we're not gonna go line by line, but we're gonna geek out about the creation of the script, because, and this is not a shocker because she says it in the interview, but Nicole is autistic. And
Yeah.
so that's a relationship, a creative relationship. And if Jacob ever stops traveling, I would love uh, to get you two together to really unpack that creative process, because I'm not just taken by the story of the musical, but the creative process, the directorial process, everything about this musical. You can call it a creative obsession of mine, but really speaks to me, because if Broadway tried to do this even 5 years ago, they would have not done it with autistic actors, because Broadway wasn't ready to grow up at that time. Although they did do the prom, so we were making progress.
Well,
But
look, like, it's a tricky thing because I would often say, leading up to the Broadway production, that it would make me so happy if everything we did, a year from now, or, even like a month after opening, is totally obsolete and irrelevant. Like, I would love to be outpaced by
Would the video cats? So would the video cats.
yeah, yeah. Like if accessibility outpaced our musical and all of a sudden people were like social disability or social models of disability, like we all know about that now. But the fact is, I think you can even see, and I don't mean this as like to sound defensive, but even I think in some of the ways that the show was reviewed, you know, people don't even know about the difference between the medical model of disability versus the social model of disability. So, it's things like that I think that our show had to exist to even start the
Yeah.
conversation in many ways. Um, and and a lot of the choices that we made, even Nicole and I, we had, and not just Nicole and I, also Ava Riggle helped, Sammy Cannell, like Becky Leafman, other members of our access and creative team. It was that question of like, well, how deep can we go in the, like in the advocacy being on stage? And we kind of knew, where do you find the balance between um, educating the audience
Yeah.
while entertaining them
Yeah.
and you not feeling like you're on a soapbox, but also really validating the experience of disabled people. And, that's why we put that inspiration porn um, subplot in there and
Yeah.
was to really give the audience and
And
hopefully
that's a
viewers.
real term, by the way.
Oh,
That's
yes.
not made up for cutesy sake.
And we
That's
lived
a
it.
real term.
It was so interesting, Keith, because we lived it in Syracuse. That subplot was in there. And again, it was there to help the audience too, of like, hey, don't just watch this musical and be like, I was so inspired, like look for the deeper themes and look for the deeper challenges and struggles that are going on there. And not everybody got it. You would still, especially after Syracuse, there were still some press that we had to go back and gently correct and say, hey, like, please don't use that language.
Yeah.
Uh, and and that, yes, I was trying to tell an entertaining story and a romance and a comedy and make the audience and the people on stage feel a sense of belonging in that place that we were all sharing. But there's also a blueprint for disappointment, and a
Yeah.
blueprint for apologizing and a blueprint for, if you do make a misstep, which we all do,
Yeah.
this is how you can be accountable for what you've done and this is how maybe you can go about making it right. So there's lots of little blueprints in there as well. And Nicole and Jacob and I, like in the crafting of it, we had to talk a lot about, okay, well, we can include this idea, but I don't know if there's room to include this one. And the scene that you originally mentioned between Ashley Amigo and Mel, uh, that was a late addition for me. That was one of the last scenes I wrote before Broadway.
No.
And
Okay.
and it's because, and again, it's interesting how these moments get crafted. If actually, I'm going to put a pin in the Mel Ashley thing to do a quick explanation also of when Jacob and I were doing our first draft. I mentioned that I pulled mostly dialogue from the documentary, but the first thing that we did was we went through and we took all the scenes and moments that felt the most emotional to us.
Yeah.
So the creation of this show was actually kind of impressionistic, that we had these emotional moments. And then over the course of those 6 years, I shuffled, restructured, added, dramatic tension to give sort of a linear arc to those scenes. And reincarnation came from we visited Dr. Amigo at Amigo Family Counseling very, very early on in the process when Hal was directing. And reincarnation came from actually the character Melissa didn't exist, Mel, because Melissa is not in the documentary, but there was a person, Melissa, who was there, and Melissa at the time said, hey, I believe in reincarnation, and I think that autistic people, it's just our first time being human. And that's why we may have some challenges that the rest of you don't. And I thought to myself, holy crap, that is so profound and that is so beautiful, to the point where I said, this is the character in the show. This is Melissa. I
Yeah.
feel this person, I see this person. And so reincarnation came from that. And then I kind of had to engineer it backwards because it always felt like, oof, why is Mal? And Melissa became Mal again as we worked with Imani, who's non-binary. And the beautiful thing is that Melissa stopped going to the center for a while, but then real life Melissa came back in the last year, and has transitioned and is Monty now. So the sort of
Yeah.
um, gender fluidity that we, created to honor our actors who are originating this part, it ended up coming full circle in a beautiful way. Anyway, I've put so many pins in this, but my point is, as I was trying to figure out what is the arc between these two characters, like I've got to justify reincarnation and it's not justified. Something that I had also just gleaned in my conversations and picked up with my autistic coworkers and friends was that was this confusion sometime around the boundaries of friendship, and especially in early adulthood and teenage years, thinking someone was your friend, but then they weren't your friend. And again, it's making me emotional because I think that this is something that's really relatable, not just
Yeah.
if you're neurodivergent, but just this confusion around boundaries in relationships, period. And I get emotional because I too have confusion around boundaries in relationships sometimes. Uh, and and so I just really loved this moment where Mel, who's the oldest in the group, stands up for themselves and says, hey, you really hurt my feelings in the past where I thought we were friends and you ditched me. And so actually, like, I hear you, you're trying to be nice, but I'm going to set a clear boundary and we're not friends. And that's why it means so much when in Act Two, Mel comes back and says, like, actually, like, maybe I'll change my mind. And I think that's really important too, because especially when someone has wounded us, to show this autistic character also saying, like, I see that you've learned something, and we can meet in a new place now, and maybe have a different relationship than we had when we were 13, and a different relationship than we had 6 months ago. Okay, that's all my pins. I'm done.
So, what was it like opening night on Broadway when you all knew that the real life counterparts of these characters, and they're not mimics, they're their own characters, but the inspiration of the characters are literally in the seats watching this show unfold. What was that like?
Overwhelming.
Yeah, yeah,
Very emotional. I'm because it was there were so many elements of this show, that felt like looking in a mirror, in a mirror, in a mirror, like so many layers of emotion because in the documentary, of course, there's this community, and again, like, this real community that we love, and when we went to go visit the center in person, the first thing I was struck by was how funny this community was. Just like great
yeah,
sense of humor, like giving each other a hard time, and gosh, and that was a really tricky part of this show too. And was that we wanted to dispel this notion that when you hear the word autism or autistic, that you think tragedy, drama, which is not to underplay the challenges that
yeah,
autistic people, are going through in this world. But I am a comedy writer. I feel like you can change hearts and minds through laughter, and
you can.
yeah, so like that's usually my way of
Yeah,
thinking about things. Um, and it's tough because, people don't always like take things as seriously if it's a comedy, um, but I was like, oh my gosh, like this group of real people is hilarious. And so I want to honor them. And then our actors themselves were hilarious. And so you've got this one level, the documentary, they're uh, working hard towards a goal. And it's
Yeah.
beautiful to see the achievement of that goal because again, it's something that we can all see ourselves in, like no matter who you are, you're working hard for something, you face disappointment and struggle along the way. Uh, and and then we had the real life journey of our team and our actors, and so many of us, myself included, were having our Broadway debuts, and so we felt like, okay, well, we're doing this. Like,
Yeah.
here's this community working together to make a big thing happen. We're this community working together to make a big thing happen. And then opening night, we had both of those communities all on stage, and so the catharsis of all of us having done this thing together over the course of many, many, many years in
Yeah.
multiple states, again, I feel lucky because not everybody has good vibes on Broadway. Like it's
Yeah.
not a foregone conclusion that you love each other as a cast and team. It's not a foregone conclusion that
People fake that. People fake that. I mean, I'm sorry, but they do the press junket sometimes. Not always, but you're right. You don't always get a experience like that where there's this real sense of community. And I really have to bring you and Nicole back to do a joint one about the script. She actually recommended that that's not really my idea.
I feel like you should get me, Nicole, and Jacob together because Nicole is in this great position where they worked on both music and script team. And so Nicole, maybe more than anybody in this show, understands the text and the music of this show in a
Oh yeah,
deep
she
way.
she definitely does. I mean, that interview with her ran long. Uh but yeah, I mean, Jacob he did stop traveling. But uh no, no, please take me with you, Jacob. Take me out of the heat. But anyway, uh I could literally talk to you for 5 hours easy, because this show is that important. But wrapping up this episode, there are always two questions I'd like to end on. And the first one is, if there are any aspiring directors, script writers, musicians who are interested in being more inclusive or just want to be self advocates, what are some through creative process, what are some action steps that you would give them as they begin this journey?
Uh,
Maybe they'll even find their own Jacob. Who knows?
yeah, you know, I think the easiest thing people can do if they want to um, to begin their accessibility journey is to have an access survey. And this is something I'm really trying to push with my director friends and other writer friends. And it's tough because I don't think there's just a template up for free. And this is such a tricky thing too, because I want everyone to get paid for their work, but I also want to remove as many barriers. So maybe, I don't know, maybe I should just make a template or something. uh, but have an access survey that goes out to your entire team before you do any development. Um, and you might even think, oh gosh, this is such a small thing. It's a table read. Do I really want to have people do a survey? But what it does is it sets the standard for open communication about people's needs. So even if I fill out the access survey and I don't have any access needs. Your name, do you have any allergies? Is there anything you need us to know? Do you have any access needs you want us to be aware of? And and again, you might think it's such a small thing. I bring this up even though this is a small thing, but our very first table read, Des said, I cannot stand the sound of whistling. And my entire family is full of compulsive whistlers, and I whistle constantly. And so just knowing, I just thought to myself, if Des hadn't told me that, I would be whistling all over, and Des would hate me. Des would go, oh gosh, Rebekah just never shuts up with her whistling. And it's just that tiny piece of information.
Yeah.
uh, and the advice really goes back to that talent, tenacity, timing is the tenacity. Just don't give up. I moved here to New York City 17 years ago, hoping to have a Broadway musical. And it took me 17 years. And I got tons of encouragement along the way. And the number seems so big. It doesn't feel like I've even been alive that long, but I have been. And so it really is just don't give up. Just trust that eventually you'll find your people. They say this business is about relationships. And I used to think that was a deterrent because I don't come from an entertainment family. I don't come from New York City. And now I can say that, in fact, not only is this business all about relationships, but that is truly the best reward. Better than any nominations or anything is that if you have good, strong relationships that you've
Yeah,
developed.
I get to call some of the cast members friends, like real friends, which blows my mind.
Yeah.
But I like to think that both advocates with disabilities and those who have yet to discover or embrace their disabilities both watch and listen to this program. I'm not naive to think that either group or the groups within those groups take the same things away from every episode. So, as my guest, and we've talked about a lot of topics, what do you hope that advocates with disabilities take away from this episode? And what do you hope those who have yet to discover or embrace their own disabilities take away from this episode?
Ooh, wow, great question. You know, I'm going to answer the second half first. People who have yet to embrace their own disabilities. Something that I did not um, anticipate at the beginning of this journey was how much it would affect me and my family. Um, I mentioned that Jacob's little sister is autistic. Our director's brother is autistic. We had lots of personal relationships with the non-autistic creative team. And my brother and I both have Tourette syndrome, which is not the same as autism. But I didn't realize how much it would mean to me to not have to mask in a room. Tourette syndrome is a tic disorder. I'm very much affected by stress, lack of sleep, which is a huge part of the Broadway experience.
Everyone is.
Thank you. Thank
Sleep.
you.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, we kind of need that.
Yeah, but there's sort of, this more visible vulnerability I
Yeah.
felt that I didn't even realize how much it would affect me. And again, so getting to work in a room full of neurodivergent artists that understood on this deeper level, and this is just to go people who haven't embraced their disabilities, people who are maybe seeking a diagnosis, people like me who passed, as neurotypical or still pass as neurotypical. I'm using air quotes in many in many spaces and places, the freedom to unmask and to say, hey, this is how I experience life. And again, that is the way that anyone experiences life is so different, but um, there are these overlapping experiences that I think the more we talk about it, the more we talk about um, our access needs, honestly. And then in terms of advocates, this is a huge one, but I try not to take it for granted. Assuming competence, just that's a big one. Assume ability, assume competence, assume that somebody wants to be there and can be there, and then listen. Listen. If the disabled collaborators that you're working with are telling you something, listen to them.
Yeah.
Again, it's simple, but.
So if anyone wants to follow your career or maybe get in touch with you, what is the best way to do that?
I have a small social media presence. I
Oh,
post about my parakeets a lot. So if you have a bird
that's
phobia,
episodes 3, 4, and 5. 5 hours, Rebekah. I'm gonna do it.
lots to mine here. But my Instagram handle is at Greerling, Greerling. And again,
That's episode 6.
I'm often just wandering around the Hudson River or the East River. I'm not the most reachable person. That's where you can find me walking
Well,
along the river. Deep in thought.
I'll keep that in. I really will. And I really will try to make magic happen and get you, Nicole, and Jacob in at Zoom, because that would be a fantastic episode, and we can all just geek out about the creative process. And Nicole and I have actually known each other through social media for 4 years, but our first time meeting in person was the Broadway reunion concert. And that's how the episode came to be, and that kicked off this entire series, which is now 6 or 7 episodes deep. And so there's so much to thank both you and Jacob and all of the creative team, the co-producers, the directors. It's the directorial team. I mean, this musical literally changed my life in ways that I didn't anticipate, I didn't expect. I was nervous going in to seeing the show because I'm like, I'm so removed from high school
Yeah.
and I'm not autistic. I have cerebral palsy, very different. Will I be able to get into these characters? Took all of 2-3 minutes. That's because of the actors, but also because of you and Jacob. And so that, to bring it all back to the beginning, that is where the creative fantasy comes in and why I have nursed that creative fantasy since the Broadway reunion concert got out. I've been obsessed with making that happen, if only in my head. And so, but I would love, and I'll say this on the next episode, I would love to see you and Nicole co-write it together and Jacob write the music. I mean, that would be fantastic. How do you write a sequel based on a documentary where you already told all the stories? Well, how did you write the first one on a documentary that had I just seen the documentary, I would be like, well, I'm really glad places like this exist. Could this be a musical? Hell no. In my mind, it would be like, no, but I would say that about every documentary because that concept was completely foreign. So again, I'm just indebted to everyone involved with this amazing show for countless reasons. I wish I saw it upwards of 30 times, like some people who Jacobs highlighted in Dr. Amigo. I should. How many times has he seen it? There's just so much to still talk about, and I look forward to getting you, Nicole, and Jacob on a Zoom. And I wish you and Jacob nothing but the very best creatively because you two are a power team. I hope you never walked with anyone else, and I hope she never walked with anyone else, because and I don't say that you created gold, and uh, I cannot wait to see what you and Jacob do next. I hope it doesn't take as long. And if you ever need a amateur actor with CP, you
Yeah.
know where to find me.
Oh my gosh.
Shakespeare.
Yeah, Keith, thank you so much for saying. I'm just plugging my computer in because it's telling me my battery's low. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for saying that. And I always like to throw it back to the autistic community because they every step along the way, every autistic collaborator that we had, and then like our incredible audience and fans and the other honestly, like even just the actors who came and auditioned and came to callbacks but didn't get cast in the show. This show would not be what it is without the feedback and the support of the autistic community. So honestly, I'm going to speak for Jacob. Like we are the lucky ones,
Yeah.
like the community, like really embraced us in an incredible way.
Yeah.
And, and I hope, I hope that we did them right and continue to do so.
I'll talk to you soon, my friend. Have a beautiful week ahead.
Thank you, Keith. This was really fun. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.